Hi, this is David Gornoski, host of A Neighbor's Choice and Things Hidden podcast, as well as some of our other programs like Science and You with our chief science advisor, Dr. Yu, and our seed oil survival series that we continue to have great fun unpacking the truth of nutrition. I wanted to give you a quick little message saying we appreciate all the support that we get from our monthly contributors and our one-time donation supporters. And we'd encourage all of you to go to our website, aneighborschoice.com, click on contribute, and make a monthly pledge today, whether it's $1, $5, 15, 20, 50, whatever you want to do. Doesn't matter. Just be a part of building this new media project that we've developed to empower and inform, to inspire, to kickstart a scientific renaissance, an anthropological breakthrough and reformation in the church. All these things are possible with your support right now. So make that commitment today and help us keep doing the productions that we have. Thank you. Today we have Shane Kennedy joining me on our program to look at some of the big stories going on in the news today. And there he is. He's making a symbol, a kind of esoteric symbol with that hand gesture. How you doing, Shane?
Doing great. What about you, David?
Good. So what does that mean? Is that the Cuban Alliance, United symbol?
I could tell you, but I'd be putting my life in danger. So
Well, you've got Padre Pio behind you, giving you good protection, right? Is that him behind you?
yes, it is.
Is that an action figure or a statue, or does it make a difference?
Well, it's kind of a little bit of both.
Okay. Is that the
Yeah.
new Vatican II thing? Is that every statue they make is also an action figure?
Actually, yeah. So this statue is from like the early '90s.
Okay.
Yeah, I had an aunt that went to his beatification in the Vatican. She brought it back with her.
Now, does it have more holiness if you kept it in the package, or if you take it out, it loses some of its holiness?
Well, the thing is, it's more holy if you get it blessed, which this statue was blessed. I'm not sure who it was blessed by.
If you kept it in the package, would it be extra blessed if you'd had it blessed in the package, not taking it out?
Well, that's a really good question.
Well,
But
that's what we're going to talk about today is packaging and its relationship to these things. But no, for serious though, we are going to talk about one of your favorite topics, which is debt and money. Janet Yellen is puzzled today. She's puzzled. She can't understand it. She says it's unwarranted. The United States government has got a credit downgrade. So the United States government went to apply for a loan to buy a house, and they were declined. Their credit has now become so abysmal that now they've lost one of their and this is a country that has basically had a monopoly on credit as a concept, but apparently there are powers greater even than the United States, Shane, and they have deemed it necessary to let United States know that they're not the end all be all of defining credit, even though they've enjoyed their monopoly on money and credit for some time. How does that work, Shane? Who do they report to when they get their credit downgrade? Because Yellen is puzzled, and she says this is completely unwarranted.
Well, from what I understand, it was Fitch and Standard and Poor's, which
you're not talking about Abercrombie and Fitch, are you?
Well, it could be some relation because I know that Abercrombie and Fitch, who both founded the clothing company back in the early 20th century, late 19th century, before it became the little teeny bopper thing when Abercrombie and Fitch were selling clothing to people like Theodore Roosevelt. Fitch, I think the Fitch family were a prominent New York banking family. I could be wrong, and the Abercrombies too. So it is very possible that there's some crossover there.
She, according to BBC Ms. Yellen called the decision by Fitch, one of the three big ratings firms, puzzling, entirely unwarranted. Her remarks came as global stock markets dropped and many buyers of treasuries, a U.S. government debt is known, demanded higher returns. And they lost their top tier credit ranking. Who is Fitch, and why do they get to define that? I mean, can't Yellen and them just find something to indict in Fitch? Can Fitch be indicted and arrested for a seditious conspiracy against the United States?
Well, companies like
because
Fitch
anybody else who would make that kind of proclamation against the United States would be considered a terrorist, I would imagine. But who is
right?
Fitch, and why do they have that kind of power to deem that kind of pronouncement?
Fitch, they sound like they need to be liberated. You know,
son of a Fitch, huh? Who is this entity, and why do they have such power to make proclamations, which would be a threat to our democracy, right? Because how can our democracy continue to liberate the world and emancipate the world from gender binaries around the globe if Fitch is going to go around and Fitch everything up by downgrading our credit score? We can't do what we're supposed to do. Our mission, according to the television, has been to liberate and emancipate the world from the binaries of gender and race and all these things. But Fitch is declaring a terroristic attack by downgrading our credit, which will allow us to not be able to print as much money with leeway, right?
Yeah.
Or am I reading into this too much? Is Fitch is Fitch a paper tiger?
No, you're absolutely.
Fitch is a paper tiger, and Fitch deals with paper tigers for a living. But is Fitch just a paper tiger as well?
Well, Fitch is an international. They're involved in banking. They're involved in insurance, but they're an international credit rating agency.
Okay.
You know, they're sort of like for individual people, whenever they go to get a mortgage or something, they get their FICO score, you know, which tells them, do you have good credit, which means that you are a good little boy or a good little girl, and you're going to get rewarded with a good interest rate. Or if you have an average one, then you're going to get a middle of the road interest rate. Or if you have bad credit, you're not going to get a loan at all. Or you've been a bad little boy or a bad little girl, and you're going to pay a high interest rate. Well, you know, the FICO score, I forget who the company is that puts it out. But there are three major credit rating agencies for individual people. And then there are all of these credit rating agencies that rate the debt of governments, that rate the debt of corporations, that give out real credit scores for businesses and for entities and multinational organizations and things. Fitch happens to be one of them. Standard & Poor's is another one. And
does that mean that Standard & Poor's will downgrade America's credit rating too, or will they be contesting that with their own score? Or how does that work?
No, they already have. They
downgraded them at the same time.
They followed suit and lowered the
so
American,
they're a credit rating cartel,
too.
Basically. Fitch, S&P, who else?
Well, there are a few other ones. I'm sure that the other ones are kind of waiting in the wings for the right moment to come in and follow suit, maybe even lower the credit score even further than it already has been. But you know, the thing that they're all talking about, they're all saying, well, MMT, modern monetary theory, tells us that we can print as much money as we want, you know, forever. You know, we can just print as much money, ram it into the system as we want. And the science says that we can do that as much as we want, and it doesn't have any negative impact on the country.
What does Fitch think about MMT? Do they agree with it too?
Well, you know, ideologically, they probably agree with it, but these credit rating agencies, they're actuaries, you know, which means that they're people, they just look at the data. They just look at the math. They basically look at how much debt does this country already have?
But why doesn't
what is
Biden
their tax revenue?
Why doesn't the DOJ just raid Fitch's offices and look for any evidence that they are in collusion with Russians?
Well, you want to know why I think?
Why don't they do that? Our democracy is hanging in the balance. I mean, do you think that Antifa would mind if the DOJ raided Fitch and S&P? Well, of course they would love it, right? That Biden's approval ratings would go up, right? So what's to stop them?
Well, David, I think the problem, the thing that no one is linking this to, it's the war in the Ukraine. You know what America did. If we back up to about a year and a half ago, the United States, we weaponized the dollar, and we said, if you support Ukraine, then you can continue to use the dollar, and we'll dole out some extra some extra allocations to you will make your life a little bit easier. Will make it easier for you to transact in the world economy and everything. Well, there's been a big pushback led by Russia and China saying no country should be able to weaponize the world reserve currency or kind of like the universal medium of exchange against anybody else, you know? And so I think what the problem is, I don't really think it's as much about the debt that the United States is currently in and is getting into more and more and more every day. I think it has more to do with geopolitics, because as the BRICS nations continue to work toward their goal of creating a parallel world reserve currency system whose goal is to operate outside of the dollar and eventually replace the dollar. What that does, it shrinks the number of countries that are willing to accept new US debt, you know? So basically one way to think about it is the higher the credit rate, or the higher the credit rating is, which the credit rating, it got dropped from AAA to AA plus. You know, so basically what that means is that if when the U.S. Government had a AAA credit rating, that meant that we could sell U.S. debt off at a lower interest rate, meaning that the servicing of our debt cost less. You know, but as our credit rating as a country drops, that's going to cause us to have to pay more to service our debt for interest and fees and everything that go along with it. And I think the reason for that is that the number of countries around the world that are willing to just buy U.S. debt in droves, that number of countries, it's shrinking. We've infuriated a lot of Africa, and we've infuriated the Russians and the Chinese. We've been unnecessarily aggressive. We're weaponizing the dollar. Even Lula down in Brazil it is saying that he doesn't support the Ukraine war continuing, and he doesn't support anybody being able to weaponize a currency, the universal medium of exchange against anybody else. Lula, Brazil is on board with the whole BRICS program. Yeah, you know, the B in BRICS stands for Brazil. But Brazil views it as being in their national interest, along with a lot of other countries, including Africa, Russia, China, and a whole host of others, that the current system where the United States is the king of the hill and no one else is near the United States, that cannot continue. And I think that is the reason that our credit rating has been downgraded, and I think it will get downgraded again.
But hasn't the state media and the official bureaucracy of DC and Biden, haven't they been for Lula's election, or were they out of that? Because I know they didn't like Bolsonaro.
Oh, they were in favor of
so does
Lula's
that
election.
mean that people like Biden and the bureaucrats, or I guess those are two different groups maybe, but Biden is just their asset, that folks like Biden are doubling down on arming Ukraine, not because they think it's a way of protecting America's power, but rather it's purely for their own they're blackmailed or with criminality at their doorstep if they were to ever go off script of doing the bidding of these interests that have big. To me, it looks like Biden's a trapped little Muppet, right? And he's just pressing the button for more cash to this boondoggle. Good. I don't know if he knows, or his whole political apparatus, probably someone in that entity understands that they are deliberately destroying the credit and faith of the United States up against the global contenders. And they're doing so anyways, because he's been paid off and or blackmailed. And so he's just driving us into the ditch, literally like a psychopathic, retard. And he's basically just driving us right off into hitting the gas pedal right into the ditch. And just, you remember, I think you said one time you saw a bizarre moment where an elderly lady just kept driving her gas pedal right over the what are those things called? The little stoppers.
The little bumper or whatever you would call it, the little
parking lot spot, and she just drove over it. And then once she got her tire over it and hitting the sign, she just kept proceeding to hit the gas pedal over and over again, trying.
And she crashed into the car that was in front of her, and she was fishtailing,
And she just kept trying to run into the car more. So that seems to be where we're at with Biden and the whole team Biden. It's a bunch of, transgender warriors and soldiers with dog muzzles, and then this decrepit poor guy, decrepit morally, and so he's just there, kind of like this figurehead, like a mafia don that's just been looted, for and he's done the looting, and now he's just there driving the gas pedal endlessly, right?
Yeah.
And then you've got a kind of a subsection of America who is just so filled with wrath and hatred for their neighbor that they will go along for that ride till death do them part, apparently, and that seems to be what's happening here, is that they know that this isn't in America's interest, but they don't care because their oligarchic financial masters have decided to take the special boy status away from America. And this is their. So do you believe that, am I thinking that too far, or do you think they truly believe they can somehow like keep America's power by arming Ukraine here like this?
I really don't know what they're thinking. So I think that's definitely one line of thought is they're just hell bent on arming Ukraine, and they're just saying to hell with everything else, or what they're doing is they're just trying to sow. Maybe they know that the unipolar moment is coming to an end, so they're just trying to sow as much chaos and as many fires around the world as possible to try to hold on to some semblance of power. Because if the United States empire is diminishing in power, the only way, and if that's where the momentum is, the only way for the US to maintain some semblance of global domination is to make sure that other people are falling at a faster rate,
So they've really done a number on Europe, right?
Oh yeah. Well, what did I read an article this morning. The Russian economy is now the biggest economy in Europe. Germany is no longer, and
Really?
that's measured based upon purchasing power of their economy.
So those sanctions show how weak the
Yeah.
dollar regime really has become here. Then,
Yep.
for countries that can
yeah.
sustain themselves on their own internal production, right? That's the key.
And remember something: weaponizing the dollar, the way it was sold to us by Janet Yellen, Tony Blinken, and Joe Biden, and that whole slew of idiots, was that this was supposed to benefit the United States and Ukraine. Remember, they were saying in 10 days the Russian economy is going to collapse. You remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, remember 10 days later, the ruble had fallen a bit, and then like 2 weeks later, the ruble set an all-time high. That's the trajectory that we've been on, because what these people these people, I think, what modern monetary theory tells them is that it's the answering the question, where do you get wealth from? What they believe is you get wealth from a printing press, or in terms of today, just adding a few zeros into the US government's bank account. That's where wealth comes from. Well, all these other countries around the world that have to actually work for a living, that have to look out for their own national interests, because all the roads do not lead. All the roads in the world do not lead to Russia. They don't lead to China, but all the roads in the world, for the most part, they all lead to the United States. So that means that we can be very, very lax and foolish, and we're still prosperous. But the Russians and Chinese and these African countries, Brazil, they have to be prudent in their national policy making, and that's what they have been doing. And Russia happens to be particularly blessed with a lot of natural resources, and they're taking advantage of that. They're going around the world and saying, look, we're not going to offer you paper, but what we can offer you is fertilizer. What we can offer you, we can offer you coal, oil, gas. We can offer you cobalt, nickel, uranium. We can offer you all kinds of raw commodities.
And
at
they
the
just
end of
had
the
an
day,
African conference, right? And that was
yeah,
probably one of the things they were talking about.
yeah, and yeah. In fact, it's funny because the U.S. government claimed victory on that, because they said that, I think it was something like 15 African leaders went to the conference, but it was something like, it was more than half of the African countries that sent delegations. So, some included leaders, some didn't. And attendance was only slightly down from where it was. I think the last African Council meeting, or whatever it was, that they held in St. Petersburg, I think there were only like 10 or 12 countries that didn't send delegations. This was only down slightly. And what that just goes to show is what we're offering Africa. We're saying this is what we'll offer you. We'll offer you a bunch of paper in exchange for sodomy. We'll offer you a whole bunch of paper in exchange for you to do things that are against your national interests. And what the Russians are doing, and the Chinese too, is they're going in and they're saying, we'll offer you raw materials, or we'll build you a port in exchange for this raw material that you have. It's an exchange where we're offering you A in exchange for B.
Yeah.
In the United States, we're just I don't even know what in the world our leaders are thinking, man. I mean, they're clearly demented. I just can't tell if it's because they're crazy or if they're evil.
It's probably both most of the time.
Mm.
Envy is really the biggest drug. Envy and resentment can draw a lot of the mid-level managers to do ridiculous things, right? Yeah. Anger, resentment, hatred, jealousies, those things, covetousness, that fuels much of these folks in journalism and so forth. They're angry beyond comprehension, and they have no moral standards. So they lie, and they lie to themselves so much they believe it. And they're just living in a kind of in a deranged state, and it's just fueled by wrath. It's true that conservatives, they have a lot of hate towards liberals, but if you really look at the average conservative, they have a deep desire to be liked by the liberal elites. The liberals do not share that same desire.
Look at Donald Trump.
Yeah, the liberals do not share that same desire to be liked by conservatives. I can tell you that. They typically want to just, for some reason, have a desire to see them suffer, right? I've never seen this amount of Americans caught up in a mimetic hive mind predicated on seeing other people suffer for their happiness. That's a sadistic level we've never. I mean, they've weaponized that violent hatred, suffering, desire, and sadistic nature in the pandemic. They were gleefully excited when people, please don't let them have life-saving support, even though to not have, remember that dumb guy on late night comedy said, don't let the people who don't take the product get on a ventilator. Well, that would have saved their lives. He was so stupid. That's what I'm saying. So dumb. You said, is it crazy, dumb, or evil?
Yeah.
Well, look at that moment right there. So dumb. They didn't realize that what they were hoping would help kill that person who was unvaccinated actually would probably help save their life more if they weren't allowed to have that, that kind of hive mind medicine, that stupid corporate bot hive mind, stupid medicine. But you see this happening, and I keep wondering, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. represents some glimmer of hope in my mind that liberal hive mind of raving wrath and anger could be cracked. I don't know to what extent, right? I had Tho Bishop on yesterday from the Mises Institute. He thinks that the 25% support for Kennedy that he's showing in the Democratic primary is not really indicative of true support for his values, but rather a placeholder for Democrat primary voters wanting maybe somebody different from Biden, anybody but Biden. What do you say to that? Is Kennedy's success, because he's running anti-establishment rhetoric, he's going right up into the fundamentalist base of COVID stupidity, and he's going right up and just smacking all the sacred cows down, and he's getting 26%. I would have thought, given how they seem to be so lockstep on hatred, that he would be showing up like Mike Pence or Nikki Haley in that base right now. They're at 1.5% in the Republicans, Nikki Haley, Mike Pence. I would have thought that Kennedy, given how rock solid the COVID mania was for the Democrat base, that he'd be polling at 2%, 3% right now, but he's doing at 26. And I know that a lot of that has to do with his name, but I mean, the media is making sure that the primary voters in the Democrat Party know that he is an officially bad person now. They switched it on like overnight.
Well, they've labeled him as being a right-wing extremist in, CNN, MSNBC, and New York Times and the like.
I saw a Newsweek hard news story just before this program where they said he baselessly asserts that the Democratic Party is trying to undermine his candidacy against Biden. I'm like, what idiot journalist would say baselessly. That's not how journalism's done. You could say a
Yeah.
contested allegation. That's how anybody who's got any competence in the world of journalism, even if they want to put bias in, they actually, the biased journalism used to actually be sophisticated, like you had to kind of read and you would feel a little bit manipulated, and it was very subtle and very effective. And now it's just so stupid. It's just breathlessly. He's baselessly saying, it's like, what person in their right mind thinks that after what they saw with Clinton, with Bernie Sanders and so forth, that there's nothing in the party apparatus and its money that would try to push an unfair, terms of engagement for Kennedy up against Biden. Like, nobody could possibly believe that. Even if you disagree with everything they believe, nobody would think, they're going to just be a smooth ride. I mean, but yet that's the kind of stuff that we get as hard news, from these legacy outlets. But just my point generally was, do you think that hive mind that's based on a sadistic, seething hatred for people who don't agree with them on everything, can it be broke? Can that hive mind be dissipated? Can that energy be turned down? Can it be fractured and dissipated into kind of a neutralized state wherein people can start talking intellectually again, or not intellectually? That's never really been a thing for mass politics, but at least just cooling the temperature down where they can just kind of look at ideas. Is that ever possible here with a significant portion of that base?
I certainly hope so. I do think that you're seeing a bifurcation in the media, and I don't even necessarily think that it's so overwhelmingly that the mainstream media is legacy media is left wing,
Yeah.
But there was an article, or just over the years I've seen a lot of articles that have kind of put the New York Times and CNN and the type of people that go and work there under the microscope. And if you rewind like 30 or 40 years ago, the average person that worked at one of these mainstream news agencies, a lot of them didn't have college degrees. A lot of them came from working class backgrounds. A lot of them, a lot of them grew up in work. They grew up in working families, and usually their first job a lot of the time was something blue collar, and then they ended up getting into journalism.
Yeah, and those small town journalists are always cool because they have suspenders and they have their little. I've seen them even in recent years.
The brown hats.
Yeah, they still do that, and they'll report. They know everything. They know what's going on in the little league, and they know what's going on in some corrupt dealings in the local party. You know what I mean? They know they're kind of like the gossip. They're like a gossip girl mixed with like a detective, a hard boiled detective.
And
lost those working class journalists,
Well, that's the weird thing. The archetype of a modern day kind of mainstream legacy journalist is that of like the teacher's pet.
Yeah.
They're just sucking up to whoever the most powerful person in the room is. Yeah. But you back up 30, 40, 50 years ago, the archetype of the journalist was like in one of those 1930s detective movies. The black and white movie where they'd have the frosted glass window on the door. Yeah, and they put their feet up on the desk and everything, and they were skeptical of everything. They'd have a board on the wall with a bunch of strings,
which means that they had the vantage point of a true scapegoat. Rather, these fake. So they had the vantage point of the true scapegoat, the misfit of society, the ostracized one, and that allowed their reporting to reflect that kind of deep distrust in powerful narratives and institutions. Whereas today, it's this opposite. It's these people who are, like you said, teachers' pets, who want to LARP as misfits. I am a millionaire and I am an ally of I am an ally of VECONs, and they're rich as can be usually, and they've never had a real job, and they haven't properly individuated, as you would say in your psychological, psychoanalysis. But that is kind of the archetype of what we see with our modern journalist is that they are desperately desirous of being in close proximity with power, right? Rather than to be actually in the low status, antisocial role of the outcast,
Yeah. That's the thing. Today,
So the
your average
nerds took over the convention. In other words, you used to have original Star Wars nerds, and now you have all these, celebrities and cool kids that want to pretend to be nerds to like Star Wars. Same thing
yeah,
happened with journalism, apparently, right? In some sense. Interesting.
yeah. Well, and that's the thing is they're more interested in summarizing the press release that's been put out by
Yeah.
the government
Yeah.
or a big company. They're going to go and they're going to summarize it.
Yeah.
They're going to outline it. They're going to say, so this is what the government said today.
Yeah.
The government said that all of this is good for you,
Yeah.
and they have your best interest at heart.
Yeah.
But 50 years ago, what they would have done is they would have broken down the press release, and they would have challenged every claim made in there to say, I want proof, I want evidence,
Yeah.
and I want for you to prove to me without a shadow of a doubt that you're not lying.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, those nerdy guys that have the ketchup and mustard stains on their shirt, those journalists still exist in newspapers, but they're certainly managed by people who are more like the hall monitors and teachers' pets, and
Yeah.
a lot of them are managed with editors who are like PR girls. So these are nerdy guys, and they've got a PR girl who's been put above them and say, "Excuse me, we need to have more representation in this story." And he's like, "Well, I'm just trying to see if this is factually true or not." No, you're using triggering words, and so they want to fall in line with the PR girl, right? The PR girl is younger. These guys are still misfit nerds, and so they fall in line, and a lot of them end up conforming to this my truth narrative rather than objective facts, right? Because the PR people come out of this postmodern era where it's my truth, my feelings. You live your best life. Living your best life just means whatever tickles your emotional fancy in that moment, and that has become the editorial creed of this journalist industry, right? Is my truth, right? And there's no skepticism about power. There's no systems thinking, right? There's an inability at Slate and all these places to question, right? Why do the powerful want us to be deconstructing gender in this time? What does that say about their interests? Why do they want to spend so much money pushing that? I've never seen one person. I wish we could just have one honest liberal have the capacity to openly wonder out loud in a public setting, why is it that so many billionaires want to fund this right now? Why? They never can even answer that basic question, which is just basic levels of sentience as an adult. If your job was to report on things, you'd want to know, well, I truly believe in all these ideologies, but I do want to know why the powerful are so funding and supporting of this, and why now? Is there anything else that might have a role in shaping this, right? Is there anybody that does that, really? I don't know. Usually the liberals who
Not
are
much.
willing to do that are off the train of the whole identity, nonsense to begin with, and so they're ostracized, right? But I'd like to see just one try to accept the ideology, but just ask questions like, why do we do this really? Why is it funded like this by billionaires if this is the true underdogs of society?
Well, was it Glenn Greenwald that went and testified before Congress about like the censorship and everything, and then he got home and the IRS sent agents to audit him?
Oh, was it really?
Yeah. Like he got home from his.
Oh no, that was Matt Taibbi. That was Taibbi.
Matt Taibbi. Okay, sorry.
That's there's two journalists that people know that have ever stopped being dishonest liars as liberal journalists. Yeah, Matt Taibbi and Greenwald, and they're all again that these people read these outlets and they're told, why is it that the only journalists that question the narratives are all working for a foreign power? Did they ever? We mock other nations, other eras when we get into World War I or other wars where the public is gaslit into going along with stupid stuff. But there's such an inability to be able to turn that introspection, like Christopher Nolan makes this movie about Oppenheimer. Oh, I'm trying to warn people about McCarthyism. Why can't you ever turn that McCarthyism in real time in a movie? Imagine if he made an Oppenheimer type movie about the McCarthyism of the current age, where anybody like Taibbi or Glenn Greenwald, whoever says, hey, yeah, let's not surveil, let's not bomb Russian agent. How come Christopher Nolan can't make a movie like that right now? That would be true bravery, right? But you know, I don't know. I don't know if I'm over over overly optimistic about people like Christopher Nolan's ability to have self-awareness, but you would think that as artists they would be pondering these things, you know, if that's what they're.
Well,
You
well, and
watch you watch The Dark Knight though, and you see Nolan's worldview is he likes to present noble lies, so that's interesting. You know,
yeah.
that would make him a good stenographer for power, wouldn't he?
Well, and that's the sad thing about art today is for the most part it's been commandeered by the elite, which
Yeah.
historically, art had always been there was always an element of pushback against the orthodoxy and current system, but
Yeah.
it just it seems like, and whether they're willing accomplices or if they have been infiltrated or something through like all the I'll put on my tinfoil hat here, like Laurel Canyon and stuff like that. The U.S. intelligence agencies have had a lot of interest, at the very least, in influencing art. Since the Cold War began,
Mm. Yeah.
and in many ways, I think they were very successful.
No,
You know,
that makes a good idea. Maybe we should do an art panel where we'll go through. We could use Adam Curtis's documentaries. Have you ever seen some of his documentaries?
never.
We can go through them. You know, you've probably seen them, Century of Self, and these.
Oh yes, yeah,
That
yeah.
guy
You,
that
you
puts
sent that to me.
all the he puts in all the archive footage, and he has this brooding presentation. We should go through some of that. We could do it like a mystery theater 5,000 presentation.
That would be
Watch
great.
these dreary 5 hours. I don't think I could do the whole thing. Maybe we get like I don't know, best hits clips or something. Go through it, and then we can have a panel to analyze, because he's really good at like trying to get. He's a liberal or whatever leftist that is good at actually trying to like step outside of the situation you're in and really understand things, and really look and ask questions. I had Slavoj Žižek on, and I was amazed that he had drank the I wasn't really amazed, but he had drank the Kool-Aid of the corporate propaganda of the COVID nonsense. He was saying, we got to get this. And I said, are you sure that you don't think it's possible? You're a communist and you're railing. And do you ever think it's possible that maybe those corporations have deeply captured the news making and the agencies telling you
Was
that?
he like, no? Did he say no?
No. And that's how he talks. No. And I shouldn't make fun. Okay. I do my own thing. So it was a very aggressive no. Right. And so my point was that I think a lot of the folks that people have turned to for their rock star anti-establishment narrative, even the ones on the left, have failed us very much so in the last few years, egregiously. And I think that even Zizek has been really bad on the idea of poking holes at the narrative of the Ukraine war. He's been drinking the Kool-Aid on that too. So it shows you that there's a ripe opportunity for people on the progressive side to get a hold of some creative ideas and really start to creatively puncture some of this hive mind. That's the only way, in my opinion, that, at least not the only way, but I think it's one of the biggest ways that we can de-escalate social anarchy from unfolding, right? But we've got to figure that out. We've got to figure out how to turn the temperature down on the right and the left. And I know there's nutcases on the right. I understand that. But the right, by and large, their hive mind desperately wants to be loved by the left.
Yeah.
So that's not a group that, I guess, in that swim fan way, they would have the potential to be violent if you're desperately in love. The guy that shot John Lennon, he was obsessed with being him. So in that way, the right, I guess, could turn that fixation with trying to be loved by the left.
And Selena's manager,
into violence. That's for sure. That's for sure a possibility, and it's a real possibility. But the left has this desire that is so. They just see. You can see that they see the folks on the right as less than human oftentimes, and it's scary. We got to be able to turn that down, right, and get some kind of, empathy, back into the left. They love that word, but they know not what they speak of. Their empathy is very targeted to things that support their comfort.
Yeah, you know, they seem to, well, it's like with any ideologues, they love ideas more than they do people, you know.
No.
And you know, so as far as artists go, I think the biggest problem of our time is that the paradigm in art has become slaying sacred cows. You know, that is the, and in many ways, you know, maybe that's where art came to as a result of modernity and everything, or maybe the U.S. intelligence agencies has something to do with it. Who knows? But we have to get back to a place where art is imitating the best parts of what it means to be human. You know, you go and watch a movie, and you could go pick any average movie from like the late 30s that came out of Hollywood, and those movies for the most part were imitations of kind of the best parts of human nature. You know, they were aspirational. That was the golden age of Hollywood. And then just over time, you know, the whole paradigm transition to be all about
Oh,
slaying sacred cows.
but the best of Hollywood was deriving a lot of their stuff from things like Shakespeare, right?
Mm,
And Shakespeare was extremely subversive about the greatest sacred cow of all, which is the self. So
yeah.
I think it's important to realize that you don't have to choose golly everything's fine art versus sacred cow slaying art. Good sacred cow slaying will ultimately go after the biggest sacred cow of all, which is the self. And that's a great fertile ground for good artists to make subtle critiques of the self, right? And deconstructing the self, because ultimately that's what's driving the nonsense on our egalitarian madness of on in America and the West, which is worship of the self.
Yeah.
The self, what I desire is what I want, and you cannot question that, right? That's why we get the comment, you live your best life and your truth and whatever your happiness is, you don't need anything else but that. That is just being completely owned by the delusion that you have a self that is an island unto itself and makes determinations, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and they don't even seem to square that with gender deconstruction, which kind of critiques the self, but only in that limited way of what? Worshiping the self to reassert whatever my desire is what I am able to become, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it doesn't go the full way. If you totally critique and deconstruct the self, uh, in a spirit that is still touching reality, not getting lost in postmodernity, but getting lost in a kind of actual understanding of the self as shaped by the desires around us, then you'll be able to be more skeptical of tyrants and crowds that are going to prey on your base desires, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
you'll be more skeptical of those desires. And it just won't be quite as easy to get those propaganda hooks into you, right? If you know what's on Donkey Island, if you know what's on Pleasure Island, that you turn into a donkey, if someone gives you a clue, then you have some ability to be a little bit less skeptical. I mean, a little bit more skeptical about going there, right?
Yeah.
And that's the problem with our current culture is that nobody is telling these fools, you know, change your gender, you know, stay in debt, eat seed oils, eat roach milk like you want to promote, Shane. Uh,
I love
everybody,
it.
everybody who's saying that, they don't tell them that you're headed to Donkey Island. They're just inundating people with propaganda. And that propaganda, of course, is in service of a spiritual war, right?
Well, and you know, don't you think so? The mantra of of American art today is the high is the summit of your life is to subordinate yourself to your desires. You know, it is for you to achieve your desires, for you to become your desires, and then, but what Christ tells us to do is for us to conform our desires to heaven. You know, for us to take control of our desires. That our desires are not bad, but what we must do is take control of it. You know, that's the way that we truly become human.
And bring the
You know,
future into the present because heaven's
yes.
coming to earth.
Yes.
The
Yeah,
future, we know that the future is not genderless, deconstructed, undifferentiated gender blobs, because that means those who are in the future would not be that way, because the future belongs to those who reproduce, right? So at the very end of history, this idea that we're going to be amorphous, undifferentiated, androgynous blobs of humanity units, tickling our fancy with every desire we ever wanted, that's hell, right? That's hell, and that's hell on earth. And there's no incarnational reality there, which means it's not going to be of the future. So everything you do should be in a signpost to the future, right?
Yeah.
If you're not envious, if you can be totally not envious and totally not jealous, you are modeling how humans will be in the future on Earth, and you're bringing it into reality faster by you stepping out of. You see what I mean? You're actually bringing the future into fruition faster when you step out on faith and totally shed yourself of yourself, because people don't want to do it because they're afraid, right, that they'll be socially ostracized, and then and socially ostracized is like social death, which is synonymous in the psyche with physical death. And we're afraid of physical death and social death. And so nobody wants to be like Christ. But if you actually were to imitate that full gesture of self-emptying, non-envy, non-jealousy, non-power tripping, all the freaking time you possibly could, and every moment, you would actually be accelerating the return of Christ and the fulfillment of heaven on earth. You would act, because other people would see that extraordinary example of you, and they would imitate it and accelerate their courage to be a little bit more like that as well.
Yeah.
That's the whole point of being a Christian. That's the whole point of being a human in light of the good news, which is freedom. That's the freedom we have, to be free from the lie of the self. And I guess we kind of went off a far off topic from the credit downgrade, but the point is we have to think about these things, because the things that we think we will always have forever will not be. Pizza Hut used to be nicer in the 90s, and it's not. And the United States,
it's terrible now.
The United States is going the same way as Pizza Hut. The ingredients are not as good. The credit's going down. I was just going to read this story from the New York Times about, how people in America have enjoyed the imperial privilege to be able to go to the EU without having anything but a passport.
Yeah.
But now the European Travel Information and Authorization System, ETIAS, is going into effect next year, which will eliminate that ability to just go over there for 90 days at a time for Americans and other nations. Now you're going to have a application, and you have to go to the website or the app. It will cost $8.
You're going to have to pay for a visa, right?
Yeah. And you have to applications will need to provide passport information, personal details such as a phone number, email address, home address, their occupation, any past criminal convictions, and intent for travel. You also need to present biometrics. So now we're losing our credit score, and we're losing our imperial privilege to go to Europe, and enjoy this museum of a continent in terms of America's perspective, of past empires.
You're absolutely right, David. Europe is a giant museum of powers that were once great.
And now it's starting to have that uncanny valley, because now we're going to have to pay, just like every other nation, to have our biometrics in the system, so that we can go to this country. So the Pizza Hut's not tasting as good anymore in America. The credit score is going down. Everything's going down. So things don't last. Conservatives just want to rewind it back to 1950s or 30s or wherever their favorite little epoch of the past is. Trad Catholics want to go to, medieval Catholicism. Orthodox bros want to go to the early church, whatever. Everybody has their little sweet spot. That's not Christian. None of that's Christian. Christian is you bring the future into the present.
Right.
That's it. So we have to go boldly where no man has gone before, in other words, except for Jesus as the first fruits. But even he said you would do greater things than he. So he's saying, go ahead, you're going to go further than me. I told you to do so. Go ahead, have fun,
Yeah.
But, all I'm saying is we need to think and I'm sorry if I interrupted you there, but we need to think more clearly about what it means to have a culture and what it means to be human, because these big things are falling apart and we can lose our minds in the moment and become cynical, apathetic, useless to our neighbor, or we can be courageous ambassadors from the future.
Well, and I think you're absolutely right, because the thing is, America used to have the vision of the future. Whether their vision was correct or incorrect, moral or immoral, or a little bit of both, America had a vision of the future that it exported to the world. It was this global vision where if you're a country in, let's say Southeastern Asia, and you're food insecure, the vision that America had for you was, well, you should be able to trade on global markets to get the food you need. You shouldn't have to invade your neighbor to try to steal extra farmland so that you can sustain yourself. You should be able to just trade whatever you're able to produce on the international market, and then receive what you need. But it just America's lost its vision. America's lost its orientation to the future. And I think the way all of the stuff that we've been talking about relates is because America's lost its vision for the future, its credit has been downgraded. And if we continue not thinking about the future, if we continue just thinking about how great things were back in the 90s, and we keep on just trading around like baseball cards and little collectibles on eBay and stuff, we're not actually thinking about how do we improve things in the world? How do we improve the future? We're in a very unique position, and if we keep thinking about if we continue down this road of being obsessed with nostalgia and just only thinking about what's here and now, and we're just thinking about we put a Ukraine flag up and stuff, and we're not thinking about the future, then you know what, this AA plus credit rating, that may end up being the last decent credit rating of our lifetimes.
Yeah.
For the United States.
And hey, where we're going in the future, we ain't going to have credit ratings. Okay. Let's just get that out of the way right now. Okay. We're not going to have credit ratings, because credit ratings are just a sign, as like a Dave Ramsey would say, that you're a good participant in debt. And the debt is not the future of humanity. The future of humanity is where money is scarce and resources are unlimited. Right now, we have artificial scarcity of resources and unlimited money, but we're going to have to swap that. And we're going to have scarce money, where money becomes, and I mean scarcity in the sense of money is not important for running the world system. The systems of the world will be based on actual things that people need to flourish: water, energy, medicine, and nutrition that heals and flourishes the human mind and body and soul. These are basic things, and when you have those things, you have the capacity to have wonder. You have the capacity to have dreams. You have the capacity to, it's not easy. We're not saying it's going to be easy, but you have the capacity to think clearly. When your entire economy is based on sick care that doesn't solve problems, doesn't solve diseases, when your entire economy is based on making sure other neighbors around the world are blowing each other up in their neighborhood, I mean, what the hell is that? Who the hell would want a future? We are coming to the apocalyptic unveiling of the sausage making of our system that has been controlled by oligarchs, powers, and principalities that do not want us to go into the future. And they only are able to stay in power as long as we believe there is no future. If we don't believe there's a future, if we don't believe in the new heavens and new earth, if we don't believe in the new world order of Jesus that's being inaugurated into history by people with free agency like ourselves, we don't believe in any of that, we're all doomed.
Yeah. If
you believe it and you live it out, we're not doomed. We're going to usher in, and people get scared of this because this is, you remember, America used to think like I am talking, because that's why they had so many crazy utopian groups. They used to think like this. That's what made America awesome. I mean, it kind of went crazy with some of those utopian little groups that they'd create these little utopian paradises and they'd always fall apart with some kind of scam, right? But they always had those in the 1800s, and it's even, they were always coming up with this grand thing, and they went stupid with some stupid errors, and people are prone to become cultish around the next thing, right? So it can't be just one idea, you know. It can't be, the Shane Club or the David Club. It can't be that. Humans will try their very best to make it that.
Yeah.
Even if you're not trying to it, Shane, if you come up with an electric idea that really galvanizes people, human nature will tend to create a kind of cult of personality around you, even if it's not explicitly said. That's human nature. But second nature is that we renew that nature with a new creation, right? A new energy that dies to that impulse constantly, and thereby allows those around us to die to that impulse as well, to not be craving a savior and a hero, right?
Yeah, it's really tragic when you look at the United States. I mean, the United States really accomplished quite a bit post World War II, but you look at all these companies that were founded around the time of World War II, and they became big personality cults. If the founder of the business had a mustache, then everybody in the company would grow a mustache. And if the founder of the company did not have a beard, if they were clean shaven, then everybody in the company would be clean shaven, and they would have a policy of no beards. I personally know about 3 or 4 companies right off the top of my head that are that way. There's nothing inherently necessarily wrong with that, but you're absolutely right that they become hopeless personality cults. And the best thing that those companies will ever do for you is provide you with monetary benefits, which are not going to prevent you from dying. You can't take any of that with you. Those things can allow you to have a comfortable life, but it also enables you to have a life where you never meditate upon the things that are infinite. And that's what's really important. You talk about, it seems like America, because we've had it so good, there's this aversion to suffering, and that's not Christ-like, and that's not biblical. In fact, you know, according to Christ, according to the apostles, the more you suffer, the closer to God you are, the closer to God you become. Or I guess the easier it becomes for you to draw closer to God, the more that you suffer. And
That doesn't mean that the purpose of your life is to suffer. It's just that
no, no,
that's the
no.
means by which people oftentimes find the opportunity to become closer to God's perspective on things, right?
Right, but one of the things, like when you're fasting, for instance, when you're fasting and you're sacrificing, you do undergo some voluntary suffering, and that fasting does draw you closer to God. You're taming your spirit, and I think that the American system that we were born into, there's this aversion to sacrifice. There's this aversion to suffering, and just as there's an inversion to those things, there's an obsession and fixation on feasting, on pleasure, and that is something that I do think the standard of living that America has come to experience, that will be one of the benefits of of our economy getting downgraded further, is I think it will make people see the value in suffering, because they'll be able to experience it. They will end up drawing closer to God. And unfortunately, in America today, the there is a lot of income disparity, which is something that isn't very popular to talk about, on among people that are on the right, you know. But the simple fact is the middle class is disappearing, and you're seeing this big bifurcation of the asset owning class and the non-asset owning class, and all the decisions our government has made, policy wise and fiscally, financially, and everything, it has all been to benefit the asset owners at the expense of the non-asset owners, and that's something we're going to have to reconcile.
Yeah, and it's going to have to come through again self-emptying,
Yeah.
nonviolent solutions. It's the
Yes.
only thing that works for the future. The future is made up of nonviolent, self-giving, love.
Yeah.
And so you have a choice to slow the future down or to accelerate the future by how you live every single day.
Yeah.
Every single moment of your life is building up these ripples into this grand pond of way, you can say it's stitching into a grand tapestry, this extraordinary story that we won't fully understand until a certain time in history. But until then, you have to, I think it's a paradox, because to chase after pleasure means you're only going to end up suffering.
Yeah.
To not be afraid of suffering means you can be clear-headed to be able to embrace abundance. It's a funny paradox, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because I don't believe that Jesus didn't stay on the cross. He resurrected, right? And he
Right.
ate. Okay, so he ate fish. He was not an austere uh, uh, ascetic, who was trying
Right.
to escape the flesh. He brings in a new, better abundance, right? And the best is yet to come, because the best wine comes at the end of history, right? So he doesn't give you the garbage wine as a way for you to suffer at the end of the wedding party. He doesn't give you bitter wine. What if Jesus' miracle was he gave people vinegar wine at the end of the wedding party? That would be a sign that he's come so that we should suffer. But in some sense, like you said, it's a mystery, but being not afraid of suffering and not angry about suffering will allow us to be able to reap that good wine faster in history.
Well, and
there's a
that's
time
something.
limit to this thing too, but it's true. You're bringing into history, you're bringing the future into reality.
Well, and David, that's something I enjoy. Good food. I enjoy good wine. I enjoy all those things, and that is something that I noticed.
Worst product after the party, or do you bring out the best stuff? I'm sorry.
Well, listen. I try to bring the best stuff out for my closest friends. So obviously, obviously, whenever you're around, I bring out the best. I bring out the best wine that I have to offer.
Sure.
But the something that I noticed though is after I've gone a period of fasting or abstaining from alcohol, whenever I do have that taste that first morsel of food, or I have that first drink that I haven't had in like 3 months or 6 months or something, I mean it tastes so good. I mean it is that feast is so delicious. And in many ways, I don't only think that the fasting and voluntarily taking on suffering is only to control your desires and to control your spirit. I also think that there is an aspect where the Lord wants for us to enjoy things more vibrantly, and that's something that if you've been fasting for like 24 hours or something, if the first morsel you eat is a piece of cake or something, that's probably going to be you're going to think that's the best cake you've ever had in your life.
Yeah.
You're going to taste every little morsel of sugar, every little bit of butter in the buttercream icing. It's going to be fantastic. And
that may be why people who have near-death experiences report that the sounds are more beautiful. The flowers are more green and rich than they can describe. They always report that it's more real than reality. And they always report that the feeling of love that they get is oftentimes beyond anything they've ever felt on their earth before they had their near-death encounter. So it's interesting that, that the idea, like you're saying, that at that moment of deprivation, of death, you get all the taste of life, even more so than you've possibly experienced without having the deprivation of life, right? Just like you said, fasting.
Yeah.
Fasting is a deprivation of food. Well, like to have a near-death encounter is to slip into the potentiality of the deprivation of your life. And therefore, life tastes more abundantly in that moment. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
See? I mean, that's so cool.
Yeah, and that's something that, and that's the lie of the modern marketers today. What they try to say is, well, indulge in the ice cream. You need to indulge in a good, healthy, big breakfast, big lunch, big dinner, and everything, because what they try to tell you is every time you indulge, it's going to be better than the last time you indulged. Well, the thing is, that's not a Christian line of marketing. What that is, that's a very, very worldly, very baseless. That's a very hopeless line of marketing. It's a lie.
Yeah.
Because every single time that the more often in a short period of time you eat food, and the more of the same thing you eat, the more dull your senses grow to it, and you need more of it in order to stimulate your senses once again. But the thing is, if you fast, you fast from food, or you could fast from social media. You can fast from whatever. Whenever you go back and feast on that thing you had fasted from, it's your senses are going to be much more attuned to it. And it's going to be far more delicious than it ever was before. And there is something Christ-like in that the first the first Adam dulled our senses um in disobeying God. But in Christ's obedience, he perfects us, and not just perfects us in spiritually, but in us following him, he's perfecting our senses as well. And obviously we'll
I
be
mean,
perfected
people
at the
who are
resurrection.
children, I've interviewed the guy I told you about. I think you saw it. The guy who was the doctor who did the near death experience
Yes.
book, and he chronicles examples of little boys who were born blind or whatever, and they drown in a lake or something, and they report what the lake looks like and the trees and everything. Now, if you're a stupid I'm sorry to be mean, but if you're a stupid materialist and you believe, right, that your eyesight and your brain is what produces, sight, then how the hell do you explain that? That's almost like scientific evidence that sight isn't, produced by the brain, but the brain is receiving sight like an antenna tuning into, something, right? It's this idea that, like, how can a child who's never seen be able to physically describe everything in a lake? And I'm sure there's a way to try to challenge these accounts, but I mean, it's just, it's pretty remarkable, And the good thing is about all these lies that are being so brazenly proffered by all the supposed elites and intellectuals of our time, they're so brazenly false, and they're so brazenly exposed to be false, that it calls into question all of their authorities they've ever had in telling us there is no life after death. You know what I'm saying? Like, all the people, I always like to remind myself of this, all the people that say there is no life after death, there is no meaning in that way, your life doesn't matter in terms of dying to self, none of that stuff matters. They always said there's no scientific evidence for that. Those are the same idiots that are still telling you to take your 10th millionth booster for this product. You know what I mean? They have no basis. Like, everything is checking wrong. You were wrong. You're just wrong on everything. And like, reality is fact checking this whole little dying elite class, right?
Yeah.
Those are the same ones that condition generations to people to believe, oh, I guess there's no evidence that there's any meaning to life. I mean, that's just a faith, Yeah. And those are the same people who told you Hillary Clinton will win 100% fact in 2016. Same people who told you the housing market would never collapse in 2007,
They're still saying that Hillary won in 2016.
Yeah. I mean, but they cling on to their faith, and we can now see. What I'm saying is, we can now see that whole foolishness carries with it foolishness in everything they say, right?
Yeah.
And so the more brazenly obvious ones, because no one, most of us, we haven't died and seen something outside of our eyesight, kind of thing. Most of us haven't had that experience. So when these authorities have told us, don't worry, faith is just a imagination, all the experts say, brought to you by Pfizer, whoa,
Yeah.
I didn't know that's what the experts were really saying. I didn't know they were that pathetic, right? Because when you're young, you're like, wow, this, like a Richard Dawkins. When you're a young kid, hello, There is no God. And you listen to Christopher Hitchens and all these people, and you're a little kid, you're like, whoa, that's kind of, whoa, man, experts say,
Yeah.
And then you realize how dumb their stuff is. Like, even people who are not religious know how foolish the Hitchens and the Dawkins arguments are and all this stuff. And all the stuff that they've said about the reality, oh, there's no God, it's just a manufacturer. Those are the same people foolishly, Neil deGrasse Tyson, endlessly taking boosters, or at least representing that you should endlessly take boosters, endlessly believing that everybody in the Ukrainian government, which everybody knew objectively was one of the most corrupt governments in the world, they're all magically angels now. And they're all magically doing everything on the up and up in that conflict over there. That's what a Neil deGrasse Tyson, that's what a Richard Dawkins will tell you right now. And those were the same people that a lot of people's childhoods deviated off into nihilism because they told them that the experts say there is no afterlife.
Yeah.
So I think this is a revelatory time. Don't you think so? Where everybody's starting to realize, whoa, all these things that, oh man, my faith is going to be really hard to hold on to. It will be hard to hold on to in the sense of it's hard to trust that there is a future in the bleakness of this time. But things that we used to believe were going to be hard to hold on to, like the reality of an afterlife and so forth, actually are going to be easier to believe than the belief that there is a future. You know what I'm saying? It'll be harder for the average mind to believe that there is a hopeful future on earth than that there is a hopeful afterlife. And that's where Christians have to stand in the gap, right? Because we're the ones that say there is an afterlife, but it's not the end. The afterlife is the first step. The second step is the future here on earth. So let's make it happen now, right? So that's where we stand in the gap, right? And try to close that window there.
Well, the whole, I think we're living in the time period where the error that was born out of the Enlightenment I think it's coming to an end. It's run out. I think it's run out of gas, and I think it's collapsing. Because really, when you get down to it, what the Enlightenment said was that faith and reason are completely separate things. They're in two totally different compartments. Faith is unreasonable, and all that was kind of codified under that German philosopher. But that's a pretty broad category, I guess. But Kant, Immanuel Kant. He kind of formalized the whole thing. But it's Kant all coming
Fitch,
to an end. Right? What?
That was Kant and Fitch, right?
Yeah. Fitch was involved in that one too.
But what were you saying now? Go ahead.
No, that this whole idea that it's all about reason, and that you can just inherently trust reason, and that faith is this just like this it's just imagination. It's just believing in the absurd, and the only concrete reasonable things that are associated to faith are really reason, because it's the way that you come up, it's all about universal categories. It's all about universals. And what Kant would argue is that the universals, saying that something is morally right or morally wrong because it's something that you would universally apply to everyone, that you would, if you were an authority, a king of the whole world, it's something that you would force everyone to do or not to do, then he would even argue that's really an exercise of reason. We really don't even have we don't even have a reason to exercise faith. Faith is absurd, which that's an absurd statement in and of itself. And I think what we're getting back to, in many ways, I think postmodernism is getting us back to a position where we're saying, where we're saying it's not all about reason. The postmodernism, kind of, it's attacking the whole idea of reason being everything. And it's pushed all the Enlightenment type of thinkers into, they've all fetishized epistemology now.
That's why the most quaint thing to be is a classical liberal, right? Because it's like saying I'm a rugged throwback to worshiping reason. You're like, well, I'm sorry, but we already figured out that was BS. We're kind of past that. But unfortunately, because of how maddened the crowd has become in this postmodern nonsense, right, we end up making friendship with the classical liberal reason worshiper, because it's like, well, at least they're not trying to throw a rock on our head yet. You know what I mean? Like the Lord of the Flies or something. You're
Yeah.
gonna make friends with Piggy even if Piggy's not wrong on some things, because until the point that the rock throws on Piggy's head. That's the problem when reason goes out the window, right?
Mm.
But we are entering that postmodern kind of world. But as some people have pointed out, postmodernity is really hypermodernity in some sense too, because it still doesn't, again, it doesn't allow for the self to be properly understood, right? And so it ends up becoming kind of a worship of subjectivism and a detachment from the idea of a reality. Like there is a reality, there is truth. And I think the Christian hope in the future, the Christian picture of the future, allows us to see that.